Chapter 9 of The Bat. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Alan Winterrout. The Bat by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. Chapter 9. A Shot in the Dark. A key clicked in the terrace door. A voice swore muffledly at the rain. Dale lowered her revolver slowly. It was Richard Fleming, come to meet her here instead of down by the drive. She had telephoned him on an impulse, but now, as she looked at him in the light of her single candle, she wondered if this rather dissipated, rather foppish young man about town, in his early 30s, could possibly understand and appreciate the motives that had driven her to seek his aid. Still, it was for Jack. She clenched her teeth and resolved to go through with the plan mapped out in her mind. It might be a desperate expedient, but she had nowhere else to turn. Fleming shut the terrace door behind him and moved down from the alcove, trying to shake the rain from his coat. "Did I frighten you?" "Oh, Mr. Fleming, yes." Dale laid her aunt's revolver down on the table. Fleming perceived her nervousness and made a gesture of apology. "I'm sorry," he said. "I rapped, but nobody seemed to hear me, so I used my key." "You're wet through. I'm sorry," said Dale with mechanical politeness. He smiled. "Oh, no." He stripped off his cap and raincoat and placed them on a chair, brushing himself off as he did so with finicky little movements of his hands. "Reggie Beresford brought me over in his car," he said. "He's waiting down the drive." Dale decided not to waste words in the usual commonplaces of social greeting. "Mr. Fleming, I'm in dreadful trouble," she said, facing him squarely, with a courageous appeal in her eyes. He made a polite movement. "Oh, I say, that's too bad." She plunged on. "You know the Union Bank closed today." He laughed lightly. "Yes, I know it. I didn't have anything in it, or any other bank for that matter," he admitted ruefully, "but I hate to see the old thing go to smash." Dale wondered which angle was best from which to present her appeal. "Well, even if you haven't lost anything in this bank failure, a lot of your friends have, surely," she went on. "I'll say so," said Fleming debonairly. "Beresford is sitting down the road in his Packard now, writhing with pain." Dale hesitated. Fleming's lightness seemed so incorrigible that, for a moment, she was on the verge of giving her project up entirely. Then, "Waster or not, he's the only man who can help us," she told herself, and continued. "Lots of awfully poor people are going to suffer too," she said wistfully. Fleming chuckled, dismissing the poor with a wave of his hand. "Oh, well, the poor are always in trouble," he said with airy heartlessness. "They specialize in suffering." He extracted a monogrammed cigarette from a thin gold case. "But look here," he went on, moving closer to Dale. "You didn't send for me to discuss this hypothetical poor depositor, did you? Mind if I smoke?" "No." He lit his cigarette and puffed at it with enjoyment while Dale paused, summoning up her courage. Finally the words came in a rush. "Mr. Fleming, I'm going to say something rather brutal. Please don't mind. I'm merely desperate. You see, I happen to be engaged to the cashier, Jack Bailey." Fleming whistled. "I see. And he's beat it." Dale blazed with indignation. "He has not. I'm going to tell you something. He's here now, in this house," she continued fierily, all her defenses thrown aside. "My aunt thinks he's a new gardener. He is here, Mr. Fleming, because he knows he didn't take the money, and the only person who could have done it was your uncle." Dick Fleming dropped his cigarette in a convenient ashtray and crushed it out there absently, not seeming to notice whether it scorched his fingers or not. He rose and took a turn about the room, then he came back to Dale. "That's a pretty strong indictment to bring against a dead man," he said slowly, seriously. "It's true," Dale insisted stubbornly, giving him glance for glance. Fleming nodded. "All right." He smiled, a smile that Dale didn't like. "Suppose it's true. Where do I come in?" he said. "You don't think I know where the money is?" "No," admitted Dale, "but I think you might help to find it." She went swiftly over to the hall door and listened tensely for an instant. Then she came back to Fleming. "If anybody comes in, you've just come to get something of yours," she said in a low voice. He nodded understandingly. She dropped her voice still lower. "Do you know anything about a hidden room in this house?" she asked. Dick Fleming stared at her for a moment. Then he burst into laughter. "A hidden room? That's rich," he said, still laughing. "Never heard of it. Now let me get this straight. The idea is a hidden room? And the money is in it? Is that it?" Dale nodded a yes. "The architect who built this house told Jack Bailey that he had built a hidden room in it," she persisted. For a moment Dick Fleming stared at her as if he could not believe his ears. Then slowly his expression changed. Beneath the well-fed debonair mask of the clubman about town, other lines appeared. Lines of avarice and calculation. Wolf marks, betokening the crafty and petty ruthlessness of the small soul within the gentlemanly shell. His eyes took on a shifty, uncertain stare. They no longer looked at Dale. Their gaze seemed turned inward, beholding a visioned treasure, a glittering pile of gold. And yet the change in his look was not so pronounced as to give Dale pause. She felt a vague uneasiness steal over her, true, but it would have taken a shrewd and long experienced woman of the world to read the secret behind Fleming's eyes at first glance. And Dale, for all her courage and common sense, was a young and headstrong girl. She watched him puzzled, wondering why he made no comment on her last statement. "Do you know where there are any blueprints of the house?" she asked at last. An odd light glittered in Fleming's eyes for a moment. Then it vanished. He held himself in check. The casual idler again. "Blueprints?" He seemed to think it over. "Why, there may be some. Have you looked in the old secretary in the library? My uncle used to keep all sorts of papers there," he said with apparent helpfulness. "Why, don't you remember? You locked it when we took the house." "So I did." Fleming took out his key ring, selected a key. "Suppose you go and look," he said. "Don't you think I'd better stay here?" "Oh, yes," said Dale, blinded to everything else by the rising hope in her heart. "Oh, I can hardly thank you enough." And before he could even reply, she had taken the key and was hurrying towards the hall door. He watched her leave the room, a bleak smile on his face. As soon as she had closed the door behind her, his languor dropped from him. He became a hound, a ferret, questing for its prey. He ran lightly over to the bookcase by the hall door. A moment's inspection, he shook his head. Perhaps the other bookcase near the French windows. No, it wasn't there. Ah, the bookcase over the fireplace. He remembered now. He made for it, hastily swept the books from the top shelf, reached groping fingers into the space behind the second row of books. There, a dusty roll of 3 blueprints. He unrolled them hurriedly and tried to make out the white tracings by the light of the fire. No, better take them over to the candle on the table. He peered at them hungrily in the little spot of light thrown by the candle. The first one, no, nor the second, but the third, the bottom one. Good heavens! He took in the significance of the blurred white lines with greedy eyes, his lips opening in a silent exclamation of triumph. Then he pondered for an instant. The blueprint itself was an awkward size. Bulky. Good, he had it. He carefully tore a small portion from the third blueprint and was about to stuff it in the inside pocket of his dinner jacket when Dale caught him before he had time to conceal his find. She took in the situation at once. "Oh, you found it!" she said in tones of rejoicing, giving him back the key to the secretary. Then, as he still made no move to transfer the scrap of blue paper to her, "Please let me have it, Mr. Fleming. I know that's it." Dick Fleming's lips set in a thin line. "Just a moment," he said, putting the table between them with a swift movement. Once more he stole a glance at the scrap of paper in his hand by the flickering light of the candle. Then he faced Dale boldly. "Do you suppose, if that money is actually here, that I can simply turn this over to you and let you give it to Bailey?" he said. "Every man has its price.